we can go ahead and get started when everyone's ready.
All right, great. Mr. Mayor, you want to open the meeting?
Thank you. This time we're going to call to order the meeting of April 27th, 2021 for the Hollister General Plan update.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I'm David Early with PlaceWorks, and as most of you know, I'm the principal in charge and lead consultant for PlaceWorks, helping to prepare the general plan. With me tonight is Carrie Stone, who's our project manager, who's been here each week. We also have tonight 3 additional members of our team. We have Tammy Seal, who leads our practice in climate change and adaptation. We have Eli Crispy, who's our primary project manager in that field. And we also have Aaron Pfannenstiel from Atlas Consulting, who is our expert on local hazard planning. And tonight's subjects are climate planning and hazard planning. And Tammy, Eli, and Aaron are going to be carrying much of the presentation this evening. Maybe the GPAC members can introduce themselves quickly, just so Tammy, Eli, and Aaron can all get to know you, at least by name.
Thank you. I'll go ahead and start. I'm Ignacio Velasquez, Mayor of the City of Hollister.
All right, Commissioner Huboy.
Yes, thank you. I'm David Huboy. I'm chairman of the City Planning Commission and a local architect, self-employed architect.
And then how about if we go to Chris Evans?
Hello, everyone. My name is Chris Evans, representing the community here.
Great. Carol? Carol Johnson, you're muted still. I don't know if you're speaking.
Yes, I was. Sorry. Carol Johnson, community member.
Right. And Mr. Larry Rebecki. And Mr. Larry, you're muted as well.
Am I okay now?
Yep, we can hear you now.
Now you can hear me. Okay. Okay. Here I am.
Great.
Retired
Thank you for being.
Yeah.
All right. And then just for everyone's benefit, we do have 3 city staff members here as well. Abraham Prado is are you still the interim community development director as well as the planning manager?
That's correct, David. Yes.
That's right. Yeah, as well as Amber Cameron and Eva Kelly, who are both, are you guys called assistant planners still? That's right.
Associates.
Yeah, associate. They're really in charge. Amber and Eva run the place. We know. We know who's really running everything. So anyway, so it's great to be here this evening. Eli is going to run the slides for us. So Eli, I think you can go ahead and share your screen at this time. And I'm going to run through the first 2 slides, a few slides as I usually do, and then turn it over to Tammy and Eli, who are going to go from there. Tonight's outline and agenda is pretty much the same as what we've been doing for the last 4 meetings. And I think all of you know that this is the 5th and final meeting out of 5 where the GPAC has been giving us guidance on key policy issues for the general plan. We've just had the welcome and overview of tonight's meeting. In a minute, I'll ask for any information the committee members need to share about any public interactions they've had on the subject of the general plan over the past 2 weeks since our previous meeting. We'll have public comment on any items not on the agenda. And then we have 2 major sets of issues tonight. We're going to be talking about greenhouse gas emissions, sustainability, and climate change. That'll be the first part of the meeting. And then we're going to be talking about the local hazard mitigation plan. For each of those, our team will give a presentation. We'll open it up for questions from the GPAC. We'll have a public comment period, and then we'll have the GPAC discussion and giving us guidance. And so just for members of the public, tonight we will have 2 separate public comment sessions in addition to the one for items not on the agenda, but there will be only 1 comment session for each of the major items. So if you have any comments, and I'll remind you of this later, but if you have any comments on the first presentation, you should give them at that time. If you have any comments on the hazard presentation, you should give them when we go to that part of the public discussion. And then for each of them, we'll have GPAC discussion and guidance, and then we'll wrap up, and we should be done by about 8:30 tonight, if not sooner, if we possibly can. Next slide. So I think most of you know these procedures, but just to go over them, these meetings are being recorded. They're live on YouTube and also available for people to watch later on YouTube. We did begin the meeting with a roll call and an overview. There are the comment periods that I mentioned. There's the one for items not on the agenda. And for the 2 different agenda items, there will be 2 different comment periods. Speakers will have time limits of 3 minutes per person. And I want to point out also that the GPAC is only allowed to discuss items that are on tonight's agenda. If any other items come up this evening, the GPAC can ask that they be agendized for a future meeting, but under the state law, they can't discuss or take action on items that aren't on the already published agenda. Next slide. So we can move on now and see if any members of the public would like to comment on any items that are not on tonight's agenda. If you have something, you can raise your hand and we will call on you. I see one speaker with his hand raised, and that's Rob Rodriguez. Rob, you'll need to unmute yourself. There you go.
Hi, thanks everyone. I just want to say thank you for holding these meetings. It's been really nice to see that there's so many people in our community concerned about, like progressive community-based, improvements in the general plan. Besides that, I wish that there was more representation from the whole community. And I think that the public outreach for the next, sequence of whatever happens past this last GPAC meeting needs to be improved upon. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there any other member of the public who would like to speak? If so, you can raise your virtual hand. I see none. So Eli, we can go to the next slide. Just a reminder of where we are before we start into tonight's meeting. As I mentioned, this is the 5th of 5 GPAC meetings on the subjects that we've been looking at for the general plan. We began this process with 2 virtual workshops for the community that happened on March 9th and 10th. We've had an online survey that was open for over a month and that got a good amount of information as well. And now we've had 5 GPAC meetings from March 23rd until tonight. We are in the process now of scheduling a planning commission review that will happen at the end of May, and there will be a city council review of these items at the end of June. So if you are a member of the public, you can look for those. Commissioner Huboy, I wanted to mention to you particularly, we are hoping to hear from commission members about that date. I think there are 2 dates in play, and we were hoping to hear from Commissioner Stevens tonight as well. But if you can pop an email to us to let us know which nights work for you, that would be great. Next slide. So tonight, since it is the last meeting, it's not surprisingly, we're looking at the last item on our slide here. We have gone through 22 separate items already at the 4 previous meetings. We've had robust discussion and gotten really great guidance on all of these. And tonight we're wrapping up with climate change, sustainability, and natural hazards. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tammy, and she'll do 1 or 2 slides and then turn it over to Eli for other parts of the presentation.
Great. Thank you, David. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having us tonight to talk with you about climate change and sustainability. So one of the things that we're doing with you while we work on the general plan is we're also preparing a climate action plan. And a climate action plan is a strategic plan to address climate change. It's going to have some more specific detail beyond what would be in a general plan, but it'll work in partnership with the general plan to identify your priorities, goals, and policies for sustainability and climate action. So when we talk about climate change and climate action, we're talking about generally 2 things. What we're doing that contributes to climate change. So how our day-to-day behavior releases greenhouse gas emissions that contribute to climate change. And then recognizing that the climate is changing and that we're being affected by these changing climate conditions. We also look to see how we need to be changing what we're doing and adapting to these changing conditions and increasing our resiliency. So we're going to talk to you a little bit tonight about both sides of this. There's technical analysis that we've been doing that we have to do to get started on a climate action plan. We want to make sure we understand what it is we're doing in the community that's contributing to greenhouse gas emissions and to what extent that's happening in Hollister. That then helps us to project, understanding past and present emissions. We then do project those forwards and look at opportunities to reduce those emissions over time. And then we also conduct a vulnerability assessment, which looks specifically at the climate hazards that are expected to occur in Hollister, how they're going to impact the community, who's likely to be affected, and who and what will be vulnerable to these changing conditions. And so Eli has a little bit of information to share with you tonight as we've gotten started on these technical analyses. The Climate Action Plan is an important document to support the general plan. It is a document that's expected by the state to help mitigate greenhouse gas emissions that come with development. And we're also making sure that it includes required content now to address climate vulnerabilities and climate adaptation. So we are, in preparing this climate action plan with you as part of the general plan, ensuring that you're being responsive to all the state requirements for climate mitigation and climate adaptation. So I'm going to turn it over to Eli now to talk to you a little bit more about your greenhouse gas emissions.
Thank you, Tammy. Thank you, everyone. As Tammy mentioned, a greenhouse gas inventory is one of the foundational technical analyses of climate action work. And it is an assessment of the greenhouse gas emissions that are generated by activities that are occurring within the city of Hollister. We organize these emissions by their source, or what is referred to as a sector. And in the case of Hollister, there are really 5 key sectors that are shown here. There is residential energy. Those are greenhouse gas emissions from the electricity and the natural gas use in homes in Hollister. There is commercial and industrial energy. That's emissions from electricity and natural gas use in non-residential buildings. There's transportation, which is emissions from cars and trucks on the road. There is solid waste. Those are emissions from the trash that is sent to the landfill. And then lastly, there is wastewater, which is generally the smallest. And those are emissions from the decomposition of material in wastewater generated by community members in Hollister. So we have been able, working with AMBAG, to assess Hollister's greenhouse gas emissions over time, going back as far as 2005, and most recently for the year 2018. You can see there has been a fairly steady decline in greenhouse gas emissions over time. As of 2018, Hollister's emissions were 16% below 2005 levels. So it's a pretty good size reduction that's kind of occurred year over year. If we look at the individual sector numbers for 2005 compared to 2018, you can see that emissions in some sectors have gone down quite substantially, while some others have seen some more significant increases. As I mentioned, these are inventory results that were prepared by AMBAG. They've been doing greenhouse gas inventories for individual communities in the region now on an annual basis. And we are currently working with AMBAG to try and better understand some of the underlying numbers and methods behind these results. Some of these changes are a little different than what we might otherwise expect. So we want to make sure we understand what is going into these results and producing these outcomes. So we will revise these numbers as needed. We really want to make sure that the methods and data sources that are being used in these inventories are consistent, not only across Hollister's own inventories, so that we can accurately compare 2005 and 2018 numbers and all the others, but also that they are consistent with current recommendations as put forward by the state and other guiding agencies, so we can accurately compare and assess Hollister in relation to other communities. The greenhouse gas inventory lets us know what Hollister's historic emissions are, what they were in the past. And then moving forward, the next step would be to project future greenhouse gas emissions based on projected changes in demographics and various existing and planned activities being undertaken at the state, regional, or local levels. Once that's done, we want to establish greenhouse gas reduction targets, a level of desired reduction to keep the city on a more sustainable path. The state has set its own targets for greenhouse gas reduction and carbon-free electricity. Those are shown here. And Hollister does have the option of adopting these targets as its own, just applying the state targets to Hollister's own emissions, or the city has an option of coming up with other targets. They should be generally consistent with the path that the state has laid out, but the numbers can deviate from the state specific values here. You may have seen that we have worked with the general plan team to develop some potential greenhouse gas reduction strategies that might be included in the climate action plan and as part of the general plan process. So these strategies have gone through the public outreach and engagement process. I'm not going to read them all now, but we will circle back to these topics a little later. And our goal is to try and identify some potential strategies that can really get at all of Hollister's potential sources of greenhouse gas emissions, as well as trying to provide other community benefits, such as conservation of resources, saving money on utility bills, improving public health and equity, and so on. The Chamber of Commerce Green Committee had some other comments and suggestions on topics to address, and three of those, recycled water, green building codes, and pollution prevention, were newer topics that hadn't gone through the previous public review and engagement process. So we have added some potential strategies in response to the items raised by the Green Committee as well. And as I mentioned, we will circle back to these a little later, but we have wanted to make sure we've addressed recycled water, green building codes, and pollution prevention, and provided some potential policy responses organized around those particular topics. So that is the greenhouse gas reduction side of things. The other half of this, the other element of climate action planning, is what's called the vulnerability assessment. Tammy mentioned this is trying to understand the natural hazards that threaten Hollister or may potentially threaten Hollister in the future, and how these hazard regimes are likely to change. We want to, we understand that as the climate changes, the natural hazard patterns are expected to change, and that natural hazards may become more frequent and more severe. So we want to consider the various populations and community assets that might be affected by these hazards, and who and what is most at risk of harm as a result of these changes. We want to look not only at people, buildings, and infrastructure, but we also want to consider the natural ecosystems in and around Hollister. We want to look at the key sectors of Hollister's economy, and we want to look at those critical community services and assess their potential vulnerability to various climate change related hazards. We really want to make sure that we have a comprehensive understanding of the potential threat. And this will let us craft climate adaptation strategies that can respond to these specific vulnerabilities in Hollister and make sure that city resources are being allocated to help improve resilience for the community members and the community assets who really can benefit most from them. And this will tie into and support the efforts of the local hazard mitigation plan update, which, as David mentioned, you'll hear about a little later this evening. We do know that hazards such as flooding, extreme heat, drought, and wildfires have been some of the historic hazards of concern in and around Hollister. So we certainly want to make sure that the vulnerability assessment is including these hazards and is considering potential changes to their frequency and severity. But we do also want to make sure that we are responding to any other hazards that might exist. Human health hazards, for example, impacts to agricultural activities, pests and diseases, severe weather, regional smoke and air quality impacts, and there may be others. So we want to make sure that the vulnerability assessment is really looking holistically at the potential climate change related impacts in Hollister and identifying the people and the assets that may be harmed by myriad effects of climate change. And as with the greenhouse gas reduction policies, there are also potential policies that we have drafted on natural hazards and climate adaptation that have gone through the public engagement and the survey process. And we will also have a chance to discuss these a little later this evening. And that concludes the presentation portion of this. Thank you very much. We'd be happy to take any questions that you have. David?
Eli, thank you very much for the presentation. I do want to note for the record that Councilmember Resendez has joined us. Welcome, Councilmember. And at this point, we can open it up for any questions from GPEC members before we take comments from the public.
Yeah, I've had a question regarding septic systems that exist within the city limits currently and actually outside of the city limits that impact our groundwater. Has that been looked at?
Tammy, I don't know if that's directly been within your scope, but go ahead and comment on that if you can, and then I can say a few words and possibly ask Abraham as well.
We are currently working with AMBAG to understand if the emissions from wastewater include those from septic tanks occurring in the city limits, or if it's only looking at properties that are on the sewer system. So we hope to have an answer to that in the future, but I'm afraid I can't answer that at the moment.
And Carol, I think your question is not only about possible greenhouse gas emissions from septic systems, but also just about their water quality effects and the overall advisability of those systems. Is that correct? Yeah.
Correct.
So as I understand it, the city does have certain lot size limits that you have to be larger than a certain lot in order to have a septic system, but there obviously are some within the city limits. I'm not aware of a city program to try and convert those. Abraham, I don't know if you can comment on that. And it would be an issue that would come possibly from the GPEC if you all wanted to direct us to possibly include in the general plan any sort of policy to try and either convert those or to limit the number of new septic systems that might be built inside of city limits. Abraham, do you want to add anything on that?
Yeah, David, thank you for that. And thank you, Carol, for that comment as well. So at this time, the only septic systems that are in the city of Hollister would be those that are within the properties that were annexed into the city of Hollister without necessarily having them do any type of improvements. So for example, about 2 years ago or so, the properties on El Cerro Drive off of Hillcrest Road, there was a annexation of a property there along El Cerro Drive. And along with that, LAFCO decided to annex 13 single family homes that were along El Cerro Drive. And so if any of those still have a septic tank, they will remain. However, in the future, because now there is an actual sewer line that's in that area, in the future, if their septic becomes broken or needs any type of repair, the Environmental Health Department, San Bernardino County Environmental Health Department first considers if there is a sewer system in the area. The rule of thumb, if it's within 300 feet or so. If it is, then they would not issue permits to replace, but rather they would require them to connect to the city of Hollister sewer system.
And so, Abraham, I wasn't aware of one part that you just implied, which also sounds like actually the city will not under any circumstances allow new construction without it being connected to the sewer system. Is that correct?
That is correct. At this
great.
point, that is what we've been following. And yeah, that would be one thing that we would require since the very beginning. If they have a special circumstance, we can certainly take a look at that. But that's really been what we've been following,
right?
Especially with our new.
Abraham, this is Larry.
Hi, Vicky.
Yeah, I think Carol's referring to some of the islands that are within the city limits, some county properties, especially off of Valley View, and I think there's even some properties downtown area that they're actually considered to be in the county, although they're within the city limits. I think she's referring to those properties.
Yeah. So if they are still within septic, then they can remain with septic. But if at any point they have to make any type of replacement or any type of fixtures to their septic system, they would need to go to the San Bernardino County Environmental Health Department to try to get a permit to replace it or to fix it. And my understanding is that the Environmental Health Department would not issue any permits if there is an actual sewer line that's in close proximity to that area, they would require them to actually connect and abandon the septic.
Okay, that's good. That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Ricky.
Yeah.
I mean, Eli, maybe you can go ahead and take the slides off for a little while so we can all just see each other a little more. And Mr. Rebecki, did you have another question? You started to talk just as Carol Johnson was speaking also.
Yeah, it seems like the two sources of greenhouse effect are solid waste and transportation. The increase in solid waste since 2005, 2018 is 53%. And then the transportation is 101% increase. Well, those seem to be really out of the control of the city jurisdiction, but you have a county dump, John Smith landfill, which is in the process. I think most citizens are aware they're going to expand it. I even hear they're going to expand it 5 times. We're accepting waste from Santa Clara County in particular. And the thing is, how do you control that? That's in the county jurisdiction. And the other thing is, with the rapid growth, how do you control the transportation? Those seem to be 2 sources of greenhouse gases that we have little control over. Yeah.
Tammy or Eli, do you want to comment on that?
I think we probably both will. It's always a team effort here. Well, I'd like to point out that these are sectors that we think the city can actually directly influence, particularly, the transportation emissions can be related to your land use decision making, which is a big part of this general plan update. So where where we put the uses, how the uses work with each other, that's definitely within your control. And you also have the opportunity to provide active transportation and many options for mobility. And some of those are going to be city-led or city in partnership with regional agencies. So while you can't maybe directly control decisions people make in their cars, what you're doing is by providing more options, you're making more options available for people to reduce their emissions, to reduce the time they travel, maybe to work closer to home. So those are decisions you can influence. And solid waste is something we work at quite a bit through education and outreach and providing opportunities for people to do other things, not just throw everything away. You have recycling and composting, and there are a lot of state requirements. So the state is coming in the waste sector with many requirements that are helping to reduce the emissions. And what we want to work on is reducing the quantity of the waste. And for transportation, the state also has many requirements that are helping to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by requiring cleaner fuels and higher efficiencies. But at the end of the day, we still want to try to reduce those vehicle miles traveled. It's a quality of life issue, community health issue, and climate change issue as well. And so Eli, is there probably a little bit more to add there?
Yeah, thank you, Tammy. I would just add that we are, as I mentioned, we are working with AMBAG to understand some of the underlying numbers and methods in the greenhouse gas inventory. So we might be able to refine some of these numbers as that process goes on. But as far as the waste numbers are concerned, our understanding is that is only waste that is being generated by community members in Hollister. So any expansion of the landfill, any new waste that might be coming in from other communities or Santa Clara County or elsewhere, that is not factored into the numbers that are being reported as part of Hollister's greenhouse gas inventory. This is only waste from the Hollister community.
Thank you for that.
Just one, I do want everyone to focus on that trend that Eli noted, that your greenhouse gas emissions have been going down since 2005, and you've been growing. And so I think that is an important step to keep in mind. And we do believe you can continue to reduce those emissions as we go forward while you continue to meet your growth objectives.
We had a request also in the Q&A to put that slide back up that shows the various numbers. So maybe we can do that so people can look at it. And I'll ask if there are any other GPAC members who have questions before we go to public comment.
I do have a question, but I'll let you do that first.
Well, we'll just put it up for people to see. Mr. Mayor, go ahead and ask your question.
The question I had, the emissions from wastewater, what exactly does that mean? The additional flow of wastewater, odors, what?
Let Eli answer that, but first let me just point out that it's a very narrow stripe on this chart. It's the blue stripe is so narrow I can hardly see it at the top of each one. So it's not a big number, but Eli, why don't you go ahead and explain again what it is?
Sure, thank you. Yes, it is less than, I think, 1% of Hollister's total. It's the solid material that is in wastewater as it breaks down through the wastewater treatment process. Due to the nature of that process, because there is a lack of oxygen in that process, it creates methane and nitrous oxide gases as those solids break down. And those are released into the atmosphere. They just bubble up out of the wastewater treatment tanks. So that's what those emissions are associated with. There's energy use, certainly to run the wastewater treatment facilities, that is included as part of that non-residential energy total. So does that answer your question, Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, no, I just want clarity on that. I appreciate that. One of the other things as far as impacts in our community is obviously water impacts. A while back, I tried to introduce the idea of the gray water recycling, and there was a lot of pushback at the time. That was several years ago. And wondering, has the technology increased enough or advanced enough that it's something that you're seeing communities now implement as a standard, or is that still the pushback at the time was it'll clog our sewer lines because there's not a flow of water, and all these different different devices out there break down. It's not fair to the homeowners. What is the true picture on that now? Because I think water usage is a major issue here and everywhere else in our state.
Tammy or Eli?
I can start off, and I'm sure Tammy can add to this. I think there's certainly greater attention given to gray water systems than there used to be. And they seem to be more ubiquitous, more common than they were. I think some of the concerns you mentioned around flow and around maintenance and upkeep are still present. So I wouldn't say that those issues have fully been solved, but I think progress is being made on that topic.
Is that something where through this general plan, we could start looking at requiring a gray water systems, recycling systems?
Yes, that is an option that could be included in the general plan, either requiring or encouraging or incentivizing that type of activity.
Okay, thank you very much.
And we have included those options on the slides.
I have a question for the mayor in regards to the cannery. I still don't understand entirely the problem with the solid waste which the cannery is discharging.
As far as how it's being processed, or?
Well, there seemed to be a problem. The city wasn't going to issue a permit for the cannery to function because of their discharge, their waste.
Okay, well, Mr. Early, is that something I can answer here, or?
Yeah, I think you can go ahead and answer that.
The processing, thank you. The processing for the cannery, they use about 4 to 5 million gallons a day during the processing season. The water they were using was coming from the wells, so it had a lot of high salt content to it. And when it's being processed, more salt was added to it through the process they were going through. So by the time we got to the percolation ponds, we're having issues out there, and the state was bringing up those points to us. The other issue that was happening was the sludge removal was not taking place yearly, so it was accumulating after so many years, and then that would cause odors in the community. So what they finally agreed to was to aggressively remove the sludge from the ponds, and now they're looking for a way to treat the water before it's even processed at their plant to lower the salt content of the water before it gets to percolation ponds. So they're now having to meet the state requirements, as before they were not meeting those requirements. So now they are in the new contract, it's requiring to meet all of the current state laws.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I have a question or a comment. I just want to thank PlaceWorks for including the policy recommendations from the San Benito County Chamber of Commerce Green Committee. There's a couple of specific items that maybe were implied but not specifically commented on, and one is the groundwater sustainability plan that is being prepared by the San Benito County Water District. It should be completed in June 2022, I believe, and it's part of the recommendation of the Green Committee to include that in the general plan. Also, one thing that kind of jumps out is on the transportation, which is one of our issues that has accelerated greenhouse gas emissions. There is a policy or recommendation for creating and promoting walkable mixed-use neighborhoods, which would lower the carbon footprint. I think we may be talking about that in the future.
And Mr. Huboy, you can certainly bring those up again after we do the public comment to make sure we cover them in the direction that you all give us.
Thank you, I will.
Yeah. Any other questions for Tammy or Eli or our team before we go to public comment? So we will take public comment now, and then we'll come back to the GPAC to work through each of the items. I want to just say again to the public that this is the only chance to comment on this entire presentation and all of the items that Tammy and Eli went over. So if you have any comment on these, please do give it now. I see one hand raised already, and that's from Selena Stotler. So we'll take her first. And then if any other members of the public would like to comment, we'll take you. We are limiting these comments to 3 minutes. So Selena, go ahead.
Okay, I'll try to get all my comments in 3 minutes. Hi, everyone. I'm Selena Stotler. I am an integrated waste management staff analyst with the county, also representing the 2 cities. And then I chair the Green Committee. My first comment was regarding the AMBAG inventory data. One of my concerns when we were reviewing the solid waste for the unincorporated county is that it's very general, and it doesn't really go into the details of, for example, the emissions from flaring off the methane or the additional transportation that's coming from out of county. It's really just looking at the tonnage of waste going to the landfill. So then my concerns would be all of these other data is very generalized, and I wonder if the city, after speaking to AMBAG, would consider doing their own maybe additional report or digging deeper into our actual emissions, because again, these seem very general. So when we adopt policies or any actions, are they really going to have as big of an impact as they could if we knew our true emissions? That's my first comment. And then let's see. Regarding staffing, climate action planning and adopting policies, it takes a lot of staff time. So I'm wondering how the city plans to utilize current agencies like, let's say, Water Resources Association of San Benito County, the Integrated Waste Management Regional Agency, but also adding additional staff to help report on these emissions. Is that being discussed, considered? There's so many grant opportunities, programs to take advantage of, and additional staff is needed to do that. So, and then my last comment is, how can the Green Committee get involved? We would love to assist with the process. We have so many local experts in the field, energy, water, solid waste, and so we do want to be a part of this process, and I wanted to share that.
Great. Well, thank you very much. And you did that actually in 2 minutes, so congratulations. Not all of our members of the public obviously are also professional technical experts on this. And I think Tammy, Eli, Carrie and I, and certainly city staff would love to probably talk to you, Selena, during your work day and see if you have other opinions. And I'll just say to Carrie and our staff that we might consider a policy or action to try and maintain involvement of the experts who live in the community as the general plan is implemented. So I'm sure we could add some language in that regard also.
Great. I'll drop my email in the chat box.
Please, that would be great. Are there other members of the public who would like to speak on these items? I see no other hands raised, although there is and Celine, so Selena's put her email address into the Q&A. Carrie, can you make sure you get that for us? Oh, now she has another one. We got two of them, great. So Selena, we'll definitely note those and be in touch with you. Any other members of the public? Okay, hearing none, let's go on back then. Eli, if you could share the screen again, and I'm gonna move us through a discussion of the items that Eli and Tammy have gone through. So we have a list of, I believe it's 14 items on 2 slides. And you can choose as many of these policies and goals and strategies as you would like. You may think that all of them are great, and you may think that you want only some of them. We've done this already at 4 other meetings, so I think you all know the drill. So let me open it up for comments from the committee members. Eli, maybe you can, I think it's important probably to see them all a little bit. So maybe you can put these 6 up and let's let folks read them. And then I'll ask you to go to the other 5 or 6 before we start the discussion. So let's give us a minute or so while people see these. And minute, I probably mean loosely, but. And now why don't we go ahead to the other one and then we'll come back to this one. So there are 10 total. So I wanted everyone to get to see all of them, but why don't we go back now to the first 6 and then we'll come to these last 4. So do GPAC members have comments on these first 6 as to which ones you would like to see in the plan and which ones don't seem appropriate in Hollister? And any others that you would want to add beyond these?
You have a question number, we go here. Does number 4, transition to carbon free, is that basically saying removing natural gas? Is that what that means?
That would mean removing natural gas could be a part of that. It wouldn't be required, but it means that greenhouse gas reductions would be achieved, probably fairly significant reductions. And then any remaining greenhouse gas emissions would be offset through participation in some degree of carbon credit or carbon offset program. And that carbon neutral goal is a goal that the state has set to be carbon neutral, net carbon neutral by 2045. So that would be keeping in line with the direction that the state has indicated.
So Eli, you're saying that the language on number 4 could be, instead of being carbon free, it could be net carbon neutral as well.
Oh, I'm sorry, I beg your pardon. I was referring to the wrong one. Yes, the transition to carbon-free energy sources in new and existing development. Yes, that would involve removal or ceasing use of natural gas, and then all electricity use to be either renewable or carbon-free.
And that would be ceasing use of natural gas as we know it today.
Yeah,
yes. It would be fair to say that it's currently not available in any alternative forms. It's producing GHGs right now.
Is there anything, and this is rather specific, speaking of the methane from the landfill, is there anything or strategies that we can embrace to capture that methane for cogeneration and update our landfills?
Yes, I understand it's a relatively common strategy. There are quite a few landfills, certainly in California and probably elsewhere, that do capture at least some of that methane and use it for either use it to produce electricity, or it can be converted to a liquid fuel that can be used for vehicles and equipment.
Can we explore possible applications here locally for that technology?
I certainly don't see why not. I think exploring that is absolutely something that could be included in this plan.
So that's a first note for us to make, and just for Carrie too, that we haven't really heard any of these 10 to keep them or take them off, but we'll add an 11th about trying to move the landfill towards capturing some of the methane.
Yes.
Just a reminder that landfill is not in the city, it's county. There was a proposal a few years back, a company trying to do exactly that, but I think they backed out of that.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and I think it can still be in the general plan that the city would seek to work with the county to.
It could be a partnership type of cooperation with the county to see, because it certainly does have an effect on us locally here.
Well, I think one of the main things the city could do is really, and I think we've expressed this before, but this, as was mentioned by Celine, 80% of the landfills from outside of the county being brought in, really causing us a major issue in our community, and yet it continues. So that's, I think, the number one thing we could be doing is trying to remedy that part.
I agree.
Okay, so we can add that as well, 2 items about the landfill. Any comments on these 6 that we see here?
I have
go
a
ahead, Carol.
comment on number 3. Is this in existing homes and businesses, or are we talking about future development? Because one thing I would love to see for future development would be that the new construction would have to have solar. It would have to be part of their.
That's a requirement in the state now.
Yeah.
It's already required.
And is it with these new homes that are being built right now, Ignacio, is it because they were approved prior to that law that they're not installing solar on these new homes?
The state law requires single family homes to have solar. Maybe Abraham could expand on that and tell us what's going on there.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Carol and Mr. Mayor. Yeah, so the building code does follow the state code, and right now, any new home that's being built has to be at least constructed and be ready for solar. I know that as part of any new development or new home that is being requested through building permits, we need to make sure that there is that it's set up for also in case there is a vehicle that has to be charged as well. It needs to meet all Title 24 for energy efficiency. Regarding the actual connection to solar, to actually have solar on the property, I'll confirm with building official Mini Arredondo. She is on top of all of that. I'll confirm with her and get back to the team and let you all know. But I know that there is requirements to make homes pretty much very, very efficient in regards to energy at this point.
Yeah. There seems to be confusion. I thought that the state mandated that all new homes have solar, not just be set up for the future, but to actually install solar upon construction. So I'm kind of in the dark. I hear different stories. And I was under the assumption that all new construction would include solar.
Eli or Tammy, I know you keep up on a lot of these building codes issues. Can you speak to that, where the state is on that?
Yes, our understanding is that the state does require solar on all new single-family homes, and I believe it's new multifamily of 3 stories or less, and that requirement went into effect as of the beginning of 2020. I think there are a very limited number of exemptions, but by and large, all new homes constructed after the start of 2020 all low-rise resident multifamily and all single-family is required to have installed solar panels, not just be wired for it at a later date.
I think that's the, as you say, 2020, but the current 2019 Cal Green Code, I don't believe that is a requirement, but for as the code that is applicable today.
Our understanding is that requirement lives in Part 6 of Title 24, and Cal Green is Part 11, so it would not be included. It's in a different section of the code than Cal Green.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm wanting to also move us along, keep us focused on the questions at hand. I heard maybe a little concern about number 4 and whether you want to be suggesting a transition away from natural gas. I don't know if there are committee members who want to say that specifically. Otherwise, it sounds like all 6 of these are probably things that people are generally supporting. Does anybody want to comment either on number 4 and the natural gas or on any part of the 6 of these?
Going back to number 4, is the state going to be requiring that throughout the state? Does anybody know that answer?
We do know the state has goals for the energy sector that would take us to, Eli, I think we've moved past that slide, but I believe our energy sector has to be carbon free by 2045. Is that right?
The electricity sector has to be carbon free.
Yeah, our electricity sector has to be carbon free by 2045. There's also a carbon neutral goal by 2045. So it's a lot to keep track of. So that is what we know about where the state is headed, is to clean up the electricity sector, at least at a minimum, and then to achieve carbon neutrality across all sectors statewide by 2045. That does not explicitly include a ban on natural gas, though.
Thank you.
All right.
I'm a proponent of all 6 of these.
You're in favor of keeping all 6 of them?
I'm in favor of keeping all 6.
I'm fine with it too.
I agree.
Yeah, I agree.
I agree.
Cool. All right, that sounds like at least a majority. Eli, why don't we go on to the next slide with the last 4 of the 10? So these look at transportation, waste, water use, and creating more jobs, which obviously we've talked about job creation quite a bit. And obviously if people drive less to outside jobs, that's going to have a good GHG effect as well. Any comments on these?
I like them all.
I would just go on number 9, include the recycling through gray water. I think it's time we need to start moving in that direction.
And can I ask, this maybe is my lack of technical understanding, but there's both gray water use capture at the residence for use directly in, say, a garden, and then there's also recycled water that goes to the sewage plant and then comes back in purple pipes. Mr. Mayor, are you talking about both of those or one of those in particular?
Well, definitely capture at the residence, recycle to use, again, shower or different shower toilets or some of the landscape as you're talking about. I think as a city, we are currently processing the water to a level that it's actually being used now for crops. So I think we're doing a good job of that in the community now.
So that on that side, it would be continuing to do that and expanding it. And on the first one is the capture at the residence itself.
Yes.
So David, if I could, we do have coming up, we have a slide that has some gray water policies on it. I was just double checking what's ahead of us. So we're happy to add that to number 9, but I also wanted to remind everyone that we have some more specific ones coming up.
We can leave it as it is then. I'm fine.
Okay, unless there are other comments, we can go on to the next slide and we'll get to the gray water soon. I think these are all good. So these here, this one does have recycled water, which is essentially the equivalent of gray water. And then we have 2 on green building codes as well. And these in particular, we added these because the Green Committee of the Chamber of Commerce asked that we look at things on recycled water and green building codes. And then on the next slide, I believe is it solid waste? What's the third subject? I'm sorry, I've forgotten. But the next slide here, can we just go ahead one slide to remind us?
It's pollution prevention.
Pollution prevention, right. So we've got a series of items here. So we'll look at these first on recycled water and green building codes. Any comments on these? And Mr. Mayor, now if these don't look like quite enough on recycled water, we can certainly add something. But encourage the installation of on-site gray water and rainwater collection systems is here as the third bullet.
I guess I would want clarification on the collection of rainwater on a residential unit. How would that work in a normal neighborhood?
You can essentially the roofs drain to the gutters and the gutters go into downspouts and the downspouts go into a barrel instead of going into the street.
Right. I mean, right now we're to retention ponds inside the neighborhoods. That's where the rainwater is going.
Right. And then I think from there that generally it might have some percolation out, but it's probably just retained there for flood control purposes and then released the natural gravity fed system, but it's attenuated there and then released into creeks. And it could be captured instead and reused on a site. So to the extent that if the water flow is important for any downstream use or for percolation, that those could work at cross purposes. But the concept of capturing the rainwater is then it could be used directly for irrigation in a garden.
I love it. If we can do it, that's great.
Okay, good. Any comments on any of these?
Well, I will say we're making quite a bit of progress on capturing stormwater and with low impact development guidelines here locally, knowing that as an architect, I've seen the change of plan review in that regard, that we're talking about swells and rainwater gardens and that type of thing. It's becoming paramount to site design here. And it's also following the green codes in that regard.
Great, thank you for that reminder. Any comments on these? Okay, then hearing none, it sounds like we want to keep most of these, and then we've got these on pollution prevention. And I will say that pollution prevention is a pretty broad term, so we tried to capture as many things as we could think of in terms of pollution prevention. But Commissioner Huboy, I know you were instrumental in helping to make sure these comments were submitted. If we've missed the mark here in any way, please let us know.
I'm glad you're mentioning the habitat, because that was also part of the Green Committee policy on habitat, identifying those areas that are sensitive and restoration.
All right, unless there are any comments on these, I think we'll probably move all of these into the general plan as well.
Looks good to me.
Looks good.
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 Right. Okay, Eli, I think we can have the next slide then. So this is about hazards, natural hazards and climate change susceptibility. And Eli, help me out here. I think this is the only slide with these. Is that right? Or do we have any after this one?
I believe this is the only one on this topic.
Okay. So yeah, so this will be the end of the issues that Tammy and Eli have brought to us. So are there any comments on these items that are intended to address natural hazards and climate susceptibility? Let me point out that as soon as we're done on this slide, we'll be going over to Aaron, who's going to talk about hazard planning more broadly.
good to me.
Looks good. Good.
All right, so I guess we'll move these on as well. Okay, great. So we can just skip this slide, and I think we'll come back to this at the end. And I think for now, we've stopped the screen sharing, and I want to introduce Aaron Pfannenstiel, who's here with us from Atlas Planning. His company is doing the local hazard mitigation plan and working on the safety element as part of the general plan. Aaron's going to give another presentation. We'll go through the same set of steps where Aaron gives a presentation. We'll take questions from the GPAC. We will then open it up for public comment, and then we'll come back to all of you to provide comment and guidance. Aaron.
Thank you, David. Yes, so we are here to talk tonight about the local hazard mitigation plan. And this is great timing on the city's part, and staff and PlaceWorks had the foresight to integrate this into the general plan update, which really helps in streamlining the process. And so tonight, I'll do a quick overview of what the hazard mitigation plan is, who, of course, is leading the charge on this, and really ultimately why you want to do this type of plan, and how it works best in, with the general plan update like we're doing tonight. So, just to really highlight how we address hazards within our communities, there's really three main documents that play a large role in addressing the natural and human caused hazards. The general plan safety element, this is the kind of foundation of the general plan when we're dealing with hazards. And this is because the legislature, in its infinite wisdom, required that we do address natural and human caused hazards as part of the general plan. That's codified in the code section 65302G1. And this is really focused on what is our long perspective for how we want to address hazards, make our community safe. So there's not a high degree of specificity, but in the last 20 years, we've started to see a focus that we do need to really focus on the short timelines and higher degree of specificity. And that's where an emergency operations plan comes into play. This is really what the city will use on a day-to-day basis when something is happening, and how do you respond, who responds, the timeframes necessary to ensure effective response. But the local hazard mitigation plan is a really good bridge, and these plans have a 5-year shelf life, and so every 5 years, a community is required to update their hazard mitigation plan, and it's for a very specific reason that I'll get into shortly. So to really quickly explain what hazard mitigation is, it's really about what are the sustained actions that a community can take to reduce or eliminate long-term risk to life and property from hazards. So when you're going through a hazard mitigation planning process, you're really not only trying to understand where are the areas of concern within your community, but then what are the future actions and steps that you can take. And this is really focused on ultimately reducing that future vulnerability. And that's really what the plan, what its role is. It's to make sure that you have a plan in place of what actions you want to take into the future. And what it really does is it focuses on identifying what are the community hazards that you're concerned about, what are the risks associated with those particular hazards, and then what are the policies or projects that you could employ to reduce those potential risks. One of the key elements and shortfalls that we've seen over the years with a lot of communities is the final step, which is how you then implement and monitor these plans. Like I said, these plans have a 5-year shelf life, and it's for a very important reason. It's to ensure that these plans continue to stay relevant to the community. And as part of this, the plan is not as important really as the process that is employed. And so We are in a process right now working very closely with city staff and a variety of departments, as well as a couple of outside stakeholders to really understand the community of Hollister and what are the hazards that are of greatest concern that should be addressed as part of this planning process. And you can see who we've already engaged with. We'll be conducting a series of meetings. We've already conducted one of them, and we have two more to follow on to complete this planning process as we're developing the plan itself. And why, again, do we want to do this type of plan? Well, as I pointed out, they have a 5-year shelf life, and that 5 years is really an eligibility period that affords the city opportunities for grant funding. And there are 3 main grant funding programs through FEMA. The first one is the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities Program. This is actually a new program. It replaced a previous program called the Pre-Disaster Mitigation Grant Program. And then there's the Flood Mitigation Assistance Program and the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program. And all 3 of these can funnel millions and millions of dollars into states and into local jurisdictions throughout the country. One of the key elements to how this funding works is when a disaster declaration is signed, a significant chunk of the money earmarked under that declaration can go toward, and that's why the HMGP Hazard Mitigation Grant Program is so important. It's because that is a program that actually is very focused to a number of communities within whatever state the declaration has occurred. Now, for our process, as I said, we've already initiated our first meeting and the hazard mitigation planning team from the variety of departments. We identified a series of hazards that we'll be profiling and analyzing. And those are on the screen, of course: wildfire, drought, diseases and pests, severe weather, flooding, dam inundation, aircraft incident, human caused hazards, geologic hazards, and seismic hazards are the main hazards that are being profiled. A lot of this is really based on previous work that was done by San Benito County as part of the multi-jurisdictional hazard mitigation plan that they previously prepared, and that's currently being updated as we speak. One of the things you will notice too is that almost all of the hazards that are shown on the screen are natural hazards, and that's really the focus for this type of program. FEMA has identified that these grant sources are here and in place through this process to help communities mitigate natural hazards. So most communities are also concerned about human-caused hazards, and so we do address those, but ultimately when it goes towards securing funding for any potential projects, that funding will be focused on the natural hazards and the mitigation actions and strategies associated with that. So as I had indicated, we're currently in what's called the plan development process. So we're conducting a series of meetings. Our team's been very busy doing a lot of research. Tonight's going to be a critical component of our research as well, because what we find is that community members and decision makers can really help us in understanding some of the critical elements and some of the historical context that we may not be able to get out of a book or a news article. Community outreach is ongoing, and this is tied very nicely with a lot of the outreach that's been ongoing with the general plan update as well. And then our hope is that by summer 2021, we'll have a draft plan and start the public review and stakeholder coordination process, getting additional feedback from community members with the goal of in fall of 2021, having the plan ready for review by California Office of Emergency Services, CalOES, and then the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, which those 2 agencies are required to review these plans prior to adoption locally by the City Council. And I apologize that my watch has decided to contribute to this conversation. So just to explain a little bit about current engagement efforts, we have 2 online surveys up and running, one in English and one in Spanish. It's being promoted through the city's social media platforms, and we also have a dedicated page now under the Hollister2040.org website. Tonight's public meeting, and then we'll have a couple of follow-on meetings. And so, and then I did provide a screenshot of the what the hazard plan page, a little bit more information about what the hazard mitigation plan does and what it is. And so with that, I think this is where I want to turn it over to you, David.
All right. Okay, good. So we're going to go into these questions that Aaron has up here on the screen. And we're going to go through these 4 questions. Aaron, are these the only 4 questions or are there some after this?
No, these are the only 4
These
ones.
are the 4. Okay, great. That's what I thought. So we just want to get input from both the GPAC and the public about this. And, you know, it's a small group and we've just got these 4 questions and it's just past 7 o'clock. I think we can do this in an informal way that we'll go through each of these questions and take comments both from the GPAC members and from members of the public here in kind of a workshop format. So why don't we start with the first question? We're wanting to ask you to confirm that these hazards make sense and are the ones to address in Hollister. Drought, wildfire, diseases and pests, severe weather, flooding and dam inundation, aircraft incidents, human-caused hazards, geologic hazards, and seismic hazards. We can take any questions about those, any that you don't think belong on this list, and anything that's not on this list that you would like to see added. And if you're a member of the audience and would like to speak, you can raise your electronic hand. And while we're waiting to see any electronic hands, members of the committee can also speak to these 9 items.
So I do have a couple of questions, and it was mentioned a little earlier, the working with the local Office of Emergency Services here in San Bernardino County. Are we taking a lot of that information and implementing it into this? And if we are, some of those hazards are not in the city, they're more in the county. For example, wildfire is more of a county issue, or flooding from a dam is more of a county issue. We can obviously feel some of the effects of that, but how deep do we go into that conversation?
So usually what we try to do is provide context of how much or little the community could be impacted by that type of hazard. And so you're absolutely right. Wildfire, while it is not a specific issue where portions of the city are highly vulnerable to wildfires, there are impacts that the city can and probably has felt in the past years. And so we try to provide that context of how the city is affected by this type of hazard. Things like air quality and maybe evacuation, or the need for additional hardening, or the increase in building standards. Even though you're not in a wildfire hazard zone, you're starting to see the effects of this hazard based on your surroundings. So that's one of the things we try to do, is really capture how much of the city is impacted either primarily or secondarily from this type of hazard, if it's a hazard that is more common in the unincorporated areas.
Thank you.
And we certainly can take additional questions if there are any, and otherwise we can go to you with the question of if you want to make any additions or changes to this list of 9 major hazard areas, hazard types. Let me ask again if there's any member of the public. Oh, I see John Roble has his hand up. John, we can recognize you to speak.
Thank you. Yeah, as far as the wildfire situation, it seems like we need to be consider scenarios like what happened in Santa Rosa, where a large portion of their community became a wildfire. I'm a little concerned about that, with the fact that we're completely surrounded by natural areas that could potentially lead towards something like that happening, especially in light of the drought scenarios that seem to be continuing. The other thing is, I don't see any transportation hazards here, and we do have a major transportation route through the city, trucks and what have you, that haul who knows what, that might want to be included. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Roble. Any other members of the public who want to raise their hands, or any members of the GPAC with comments on these 9 items? Okay, I'm not hearing much. Aaron, can you comment? Can we go ahead and add the transportation corridors? And I think one of Mr. Robles' particular concerns is transportation of hazardous materials along those corridors, and anything you would want to say about the fire hazard as well.
Sure, David. So the transportation component, we can discuss that. Normally, we would not reserve that for its own hazard profile as much as really discussing it under the community profile. So that I just made a note that I want to make sure we pay some attention to when we write the community profile about some of the transportation concerns and how that could also impact the community. And as far as the wildfire is concerned, yeah, that's definitely a key concern. Having previously written the hazard mitigation plan for Santa Rosa, it's definitely something that's always in the back of my mind about how communities that are surrounded by wildfire hazard and vulnerability hazard severity zones, that those zones don't always equate to the hazard will stop at that line. So we want to make sure that we address how the kind of periphery of the community adjacent to those zones may be better protected in the future.
Great, thank you. I didn't hear a lot more comment on this list of 9 items. Let me ask one last time if there's anything else, and then we'll go on to the second question.
So this is Chris. I have a question. For instance, severe, I mean, do we need to address all of these, or, I mean, they all seem great to address, but, you know, severe weather is not something, you know, that we need to really address very much here in Hollister, California, I think. You know, obviously seismic hazards, yes. You know, human caused hazards, all that, wildfire, yes. Drought, absolutely. Disease and pests. I know we have a rat problem here. But, you know, severe weather, you know, I don't know if that's necessary. Just my 2 cents.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Aaron, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So severe weather, usually that discussion focuses on, depending on the community, a couple of things. One would be extreme heat, and we do know that extreme heat can be a concern. And what we anticipate is that the concern is really more of a future extreme heat concern. And you can see that from, I think, the previous presentation and a lot of the work that's already been put into kind of understanding some of the climate vulnerabilities. So we do try to tie it to that. I think the other piece to the severe weather would be any extreme precipitation events that then create flooding hazards. And so one of the things that we have done in the past is we've integrated kind of severe weather discussions into other hazard profiles. So that is an opportunity where what we could do is under flooding, discuss extreme precipitation, and under drought, we could discuss extreme heat, and maybe that helps streamline things a little bit.
And just so I can see some input, I would agree, because I can tell you in the past when we had some heat waves, the plan on where to put some of our elderly citizens was just really not there. And I remember some comments of, well, it's not too hot, they'll be okay. Well, you know, at what point is it okay? I mean, we need to have a trigger point at, you know, 98 degrees for a couple of days, 100 degrees or something, to open up some shelters to get some air conditioning and get some rides to them. I remember a lot of phone calls trying to get people to other residents where there's some air conditioning. So I think that is an example. And you brought up something as far as the flooding. I can remember in the mid 90s where we had this one year where there's a lot of rain and the bridges were being flooded. It was really at that brink of major issue here in our community. So I think it's severe weather, I would say, is there. It's something we're starting to experience. So I'm okay with all of these categories. And I think one of the, as far as the roads, you know, one of the conversations that happens quite a bit in our community is there's no way out of town. I think the public really wants to know how to get out of town. There are several roads or routes, but it's never been clarified enough so people know the options that they have for emergency evacuation.
I was
Thank you.
just going to bring that up because there are only really 2 routes in and out of town. And most of the time, those 2 routes are not good avenues because they would be so crowded. So we do not really have a plan that I have ever seen in case of an emergency, how to get out of Hollister. I would like that addressed.
Absolutely. Okay. Yeah, that's all very good stuff. Thank you.
Yeah, this is a great discussion we're developing here. Why don't we go on, and you can certainly talk about the other hazard areas as we go, but let's talk about any historical events. Some of you have already mentioned some events, extreme heat that has occurred, flooding that has occurred, a concern about evacuation. Are there other historical things that have happened, whether it's in the last couple of years or even things you know about from much earlier, 30, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, that you think are important events to consider in planning for emergencies?
Earthquakes.
Yeah, earthquake, definitely.
And I'm assuming you're talking about Loma Prieta.
And there was one far earlier, I'm not sure what the date was, well before I came to Hollister, but it goes to specific issues that are unique to the city. And that issue is the Calaveras Fault, which runs right down San Benito Street. And it certainly did have an effect on the Loma Prieta earthquake and the earlier earthquake that I saw the headlines in the old freelance newspaper with fires and havoc.
Yeah, and I don't know if we can find out. I don't know when the last earthquake in Hollister on that fault was, but certainly the way that runs through town is of great concern. Other past events? Mr. Mayor, you spoke about flooding and bridges. Are there particular places that you recall that were subject to flooding?
It was the San Benito River. It was just a heavy rain. Maybe Carol remembers, but that year the water got to the level of the bridges, and several people. We were concerned that some bridges might go. Some of the basically some of our escape routes might have been taken out.
Yeah, we had it was like 100-year flood. It was ridiculous.
Yeah,
And,
it almost washed out a few of the major bridges in our town.
right. I think it washed out 1 or 2, one in South County and one just right past the high school. The other 2 were the water was almost to the top. So, as far as water in the streets, there was a lot of major flooding in the downtown area, and actually even up where we live because the storm drains were so backed up. So that was a concern.
Yeah, that actually happened in 95 and 98. It happened in 2 years. Yeah.
2 years.
Both. Yeah, 95 and 98.
Yeah, there were a couple of years there where we had the 100-year flood, like 2 or 3 years in a row.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to ask if that was 95 and 98. Those are the 2 big years that affect a lot of communities.
El Nino.
I was just curious too. Since that time, have there been any improvements that have been made, like to the bridges or the storm drains, kind of as a result of those incidents?
Yes. I know that they had to rebuild the bridge on what street is that, Ignacio, that leads?
Nash Road.
Nash Road. Yeah, Nash Road. They rebuilt that one.
But that one, yeah. So the main ones going out of town on 4th Street, that's a potential problem. So is the one on Union
Right.
Yeah.
I know they've been working on the Union one, but I'm not really sure. I think they did some retrofitting to the
Yeah, they're supposed to
footings.
replace the Union Street one.
Yeah.
So, we're still vulnerable to it. Let's just
Yeah.
put it that way.
Yeah. And I know that there was some dredging done on the river after that flood to kind of clean it out. But if you look at it now, it's so overgrown that,
Yeah.
if something were to happen again, it basically, they had to move a house. I remember that they were building on the edge of the river. And they had to basically lift it and move it away because it was being undermined. The ground under the foundation was basically destroyed, and it was almost swept in. There were several buildings that were actually swept into the river.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it could get bad.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, anything else on historically occurring events? And let me ask again, if there are members of the audience, the public who want to speak to this, feel free to raise your hand and we can take any comments you have about past disasters as well.
And I also want to just jump in and really thank everybody for everything they've contributed so far. This is the kind of information that we just can't find in a lot of the databases that we're reviewing and some of the news clippings that we're able to capture. So do greatly appreciate this.
Yeah, so unless somebody has something immediately, we can go on to the third question. We've already touched on these items also, but any issues specific to Hollister that are current today that we haven't talked about yet that you want to make sure that Aaron is aware of as he's doing his analysis? You've already talked about the extreme heat days that occurred, past flooding, concerns about wildfire, and particularly ember fires that might occur if there were a fire on the outskirts of city and burning houses down. We've talked about hazardous materials being transported through the city as concerns. Are there any other items that you want to add to that list to make sure that Aaron's thinking about them? Obviously, the seismic concerns and the fault line downtown is another one.
David, you're going to add the transportation concerns, right?
Yes.
Okay, good.
And Carol, when you say that, you're talking, I'm thinking particularly about the possible transport of hazardous materials through town in trucks on the highway.
Well, I'm thinking both, because 156 is a main thoroughfare now for all of the truck traffic that comes over the hill from Highway 5. So
right.
that is a concern. But I'm also talking about exit routes in and out.
Oh, okay, right. Evacuation routes.
Right, evacuation. Yeah.
Thank you. And we are actually required under brand new state law in the safety element to try and do mapping of evacuation routes. So we'll be working on that. And you do have, in a way it is true that in the end there are just the two major highways out of town going north and south on 25. And there are a few other things in terms of 156 and various ways across the river, but we do need to map those and understand the vulnerabilities. Any others? Okay, I see one hand up. John Robel put his hand up from the audience, so let's go ahead and recognize him, and then we can get to the fourth question. Mr. Robel, you'll need to unmute yourself, and then you can speak.
So I don't know if failing infrastructure should be identified as part of these hazards in the Hollister area, but I know that we have a significant issue with our water system failing on a fairly regular basis, especially like San Benito Street, where they've had quite a number of repairs on the water main there. Thank you.
So I can address that quickly, David.
Yeah,
so
please.
The failure of infrastructure is not something that FEMA would be willing to pay for. They do not pay for deferred maintenance or poor design and construction. What they're looking for is how can you start to mitigate past decisions, and turn them into hopefully future opportunities to reduce risk and increase resilience. So
But Aaron, if there were, for example, and I imagine there are, if there were places where, say, a major sewer line crosses the fault right through downtown and could be ruptured by an earthquake, that's, I suppose, I'm assuming a kind of thing that might get a grant for some sort of retrofit to make that more
Absolutely.
more
Absolutely.
solid, more
Right.
hardened during an earthquake event.
Right, and so that's really where we would focus. Infrastructure failure concerns would be where that infrastructure failure is connecting to some sort of hazard condition, like the crossing of the Calaveras Fault. So that's where we would develop a strategy or action for some sort of flexible jointing and other sort of improvements to existing lines.
Right. Okay. Yeah, and that makes me wonder also if I can say one thing. I know there's a lot of buildings downtown that can't really be inhabited because of their structural qualities so close to the fault. I don't know if that's a thing that FEMA funds can be made available for, but it could be a great double win about both getting those buildings up to code, but also really helping to revitalize the downtown if some of those buildings could be rehabilitated to be seismically hardened.
And that actually like the perfect segue into this final question. And it's about what are some additional ideas and input for mitigation strategies. And David, that is probably one of the prime examples that we're thinking about from a mitigation standpoint for Hollister. It's really about, are there ways that we, now that we understand what's happening within the community from a hazard and a risk perspective, how can we start to fix some of those problems? And so that's a perfect one, is some sort of retrofit fund or program or design standards to assist with basically using those buildings that are unusable as of today.
A question, Aaron, regarding the FEMA grant, the Resilient Infrastructure Grant, could that possibly be applied to retrofitting some of the older buildings in the downtown?
Yes. Yes, structural retrofits are completely eligible under the BRIC program.
Great.
And then one of the things to just caveat too is that this money does come with a couple strings attached, one of which is that there is a cost match requirement, so a local match requirement. And so it's usually a 25%, 75% cost share. So the local and agency picks up the 25% and the federal government will pick up the 75%.
Great. Mr. Robo, I see your hand up again. I'm not sure if it's up again or still. Did you have a comment? There, his hand has gone down, so I think probably not. Oh, it's up again. John, if we can recognize you, your microphone can be unmuted and you can speak again.
Yeah, the only thing that I'd like to talk about as far as those old buildings downtown is that they all are important to our community historically, and with our historic designation for part of our downtown area and what have you, these things are important that that their historic character be maintained. Thank you.
Yes, I think that, thank you for that. I think it's worth noting that all the buildings from downtown, from on San Benito Street from 4th to South Street are in the historic, Federal Historic District.
Right, yeah, and I think, it's a triple win, I guess, if we can create more seismic safety, create economic revitalization, and preserve those historically and emphasize Hollister's historic character. All right. If there are not other comments, Aaron, I'm wondering if you have other items for us, or if that's the end of your presentation at this point.
Again, the next slide was GPAC questions, public comment and discussion. So I think we've gone through those, David.
We've done it. Yeah, we've pretty much done it. Yeah.
Off to next steps. Yeah.
Right. So, Mr. Mayor, we are ending a little earlier tonight, I believe. I don't know if you all want to, have other discussion or a dance party or anything else, but
I could have brought my guitar.
Actually, if we could put that slide back up for just a minute, Aaron, and then let's look at it. Let's open it up so we can all see each other. But just put the slide up for a minute, just so I can go over the upcoming dates. I do want to make sure everyone's aware that we have scheduled a Spanish language workshop and now it's not in front of me, May 8th, I believe is the date. No. you're on mute, Carrie, or something.
It's May 6th.
May 6th. See, Aaron took the slide away and I don't know. And we are doing special Spanish language outreach to both door to door and at some community events to let the Spanish speaking community know about that. It's going to be a meeting similar to the other two English language public workshops that we did in early March. So members of the Spanish speaking community will be able to meet together, choose the topics out of all 23 topics that we've talked about will all be available for discussion, and people who attend can choose the issues that are of most importance to them and discuss them in Spanish. So if you know people in the Spanish speaking community, whether they're individuals or particularly if they're leaders in their own communities and they can help people to know about this, we would love for them to attend. It is on Zoom, as pretty much everything is still these days, but we would love to have people come to that workshop. And then we are going to be coming to your two bodies. We have 2 planning commissioners and 2 city council members on this GPAC, but we'll be presenting all the work you've done, including the vision statement, as well as the results of these 5 meetings at a meeting of the Planning Commission that will be held. We're looking at May 25th or 6th or 4th, somewhere in there. And we'll get a date to you all as soon as we hear from the planning commissioners. And then we're looking at a date for a special session of the City Council towards the end of June. And that'll wrap up this part of the process. You all at the Planning Commission and City Council will hopefully give the go-ahead that the work done by the GPAC is to be moved forward. And then PlaceWorks and the rest of our team will be creating the general plan itself, the climate action plan that you heard about from Tammy and Eli, the local hazard mitigation plan that you heard about just now from Aaron, as well as an EIR on all of those, an environmental impact report. And that'll all be work that we do over the summer so we can bring them to you all for review in the fall. And that's the next steps of where we're headed. So now, Aaron, we could take the slide off if that's Aaron still sharing his screen. And I'll just ask if there's anybody who has any closing comments. I will make a few just to say thank you very much, both to the members of the public who are here and to the GPAC. This has been a lot of work, 5 meetings in 6 weeks. You guys have done a really awesome job of giving us a tremendous amount of guidance about a very large number of far-ranging and complicated issues. And you've been spot on with your opinions about things. You've given very clear guidance, and it's going to make our job very easy to prepare what I hope will be a very good and comprehensive general plan update for you, along with the other documents. So I want to thank you very much, and I'll just open it up to any other GPAC members. We'll give the mayor the last word, and then we'll close this meeting. Anybody else before the mayor?
Yeah, David, what do we do with the binder, the general plan binder?
You keep that binder as a memento, hopefully for 10 to 15 years.
Yeah.
So on your coffee table, I would suggest. So when people come by,
okay. It'll put me to sleep at night.
You can do that with it also.
Yeah. Okay.
But Larry, in all seriousness, you do have it also as a resource. And I know you all, especially Larry, Chris, and Carol, you're new members of the GPAC. You've done a lot of work over this period, and it's going to kind of go to sleep again for a while. But please do continue to talk to community members. Right. In all seriousness, you might use the binder. If a community member asks you a question about the general plan, you can use it as a resource to look things up. And we are going to be reconvening you in the fall to look at the general plan itself. So you're not done yet. You're going to get a break, but you're going to have some intensive meetings again in the fall, and you'll want to have that binder available then.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hey, Dave, this is Chris Evans. I have a question for you.
Yeah.
The surveys, are those still going to be open during this time?
Yes, the survey, we are leaving it open, and it is available in both English and Spanish, and we're going to keep it open through the time that the City Council meets. So in June. So people can continue to give input. They can use the survey, and we will give a summary of the updated results, and including the results of the Spanish language workshop. All of that will come in a brief written summary to the Planning Commission in late May and to the City Council in June. So yes.
Okay, great. And I would just like to thank everybody for I think we've had some great collaboration and cooperation with everybody, and it seems like the future of Hollister, everybody's kind of on board with the same general themes. And so I think that's all awesome stuff. I urge everybody, all the committee members to, share that survey, share the website. I know myself and through my other organization, and I know the mayor and also Roland we have big social media followings. And so I know we can do a lot of work here in the next month to get that word out there and get the last few comments that we need from any other community members. So thanks a lot, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Mr. Early.
Yes, please, Roland.
Thank you. I just quickly wanted to thank yourself, PlaceWorks, the consultants that you work with, of course, our fabulous city staff, and then all of the GPAC members. I think overall, this has been a very fair, open, transparent, and reflective process. Like, I think everything that's coming out of the GPAC is what our community has been telling me as a city councilman. So I'm very proud and honored to be a part of this. And I just want to thank you guys. Have a fantastic break, everybody, and I'll see you back in the fall.
Thank you.
Thank you, Roland.
Is that everyone?
I just want to thank everybody also, and thank you for including me in this. It's been a really good experience, and I'm very happy to have been able to give my opinion, and also that of some of the community members that I have been talking to too, and have been voicing their opinions of what they would like to see for this community. So I just want to take this time to really thank you all for including me.
And also, when I'm on the break, I'll have fond memories of our GPAC meetings to date. And all working together, I think, has just been a wonderful experience for me personally.
Right.
Absolutely. Mr. Early, when we talk about the fall, is that when we're coming to the final conclusion of the GPAC, or what exactly?
Yes, so that will pretty much conclude the GPAC's work. We'll be presenting the draft general plan, draft climate action plan, the draft local hazard mitigation plan, and the EIR. It'll go through the GPAC first. There will be a formal public comment period that includes written comments on the EIR, and we'll have to respond to those comments on the EIR. The GPAC will give comments on the general plan itself and the other documents. We'll package all those up into a series of revisions. And then I don't think we'll bring that package back to the GPAC. That from there will go straight to the Planning Commission and then ultimately the City Council for adoption.
And when do you expect that to be?
Well, it really will depend on how many comments we get and how long the process takes, but it can honestly take anywhere from 3 to 6 months. By the time everybody gets a chance to read it, we go through it with the GPAC, we make further revisions, we prepare the final EIR. But so depending also on exactly when we get it published to you, there's a chance that adoption might occur before the end of the year, but I think it's more likely that we'll be partially done with the adoption process through the fall. There'll be a little hiatus due to the holidays, and then in January, February, possibly even extending into March of next year is when the actual adoption will occur.
Excellent. Great. Well, thank you. And I think you heard it many times tonight. Can't thank your staff, yourself enough for all the great work that you did. Of course, our staff, the city, and all the community that's been involved. It's just fascinating to watch a community when they sit down and have conversations and talk, how much we all really agree upon to make our community better. And it starts off with a lot of different opinions, but when you have those conversations, we quickly start to agree on what is right for our community. When you take some of these other things out of it, it's amazing how much we agreed through this whole GPAC, all the meetings and all the hard work that everyone here was involved in, all the GPAC members. And that binder, we look at that thing, we can fall asleep just looking at it. It's such a big binder, but it really shapes our city for the next decade and for the future. If we've done good work here, I think the future members will hopefully follow suit and just make our community better and better. So I cannot thank everyone enough. It's just really thank you all. So with that, is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll make the motion.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Second.
Motion and second. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Motion carries.